In 1961, President Kennedy called on all Americans to rise to the challenges of the day. He knew that success depended upon the unity of efforts throughout the federal government and the nation. The Greater Boston Federal Executive Board, one of 28 across the country, fosters communication, coordination, and collaboration with federal, state, and local government agencies. This is your federal government, and I am your host, Diane LeBlanc. Hello, everyone. Today we are featuring the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is part of the United States Department of Labor. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is the principal fact-finding agency for the federal government in the broad field of labor economics and statistics. Our guests today are Deborah Brown, Regional Commissioner, Tim Considine, Regional Economist, and Beth Murphy, Economic Assistant. Thank you all so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
To the Your Federal Government Cable TV series. Deborah, you are the Regional Commissioner.
Yes, I am.
And what geographic area does your region cover?
Well, we have all of New England. We also cover New York, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Okay. And how long have you been with the Bureau of Labor Statistics?
I have been with the Bureau of Labor Statistics for just over 35 years.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we started our federal careers about the same time. So let's start by giving our viewers an overview of the agency, if you will, a little bit about the history of the agency and its fundamental mission.
Well, the Bureau of Labor Statistics was actually started in 1884 by an act of Congress and directed to collect information on general prices and that sort of thing. Then in about almost 30 years later, when the Department of Labor was created, we were moved into the Department of Labor. So we actually predate the Department of Labor by almost 30 years in terms of our creation.
Okay, so who were you part of prior to becoming the part of the Department of Labor?
We were an independent agency for many years, and then we were sort of folded into a Department of Industry and Commerce, and then the Department of Labor, whenever that was created in 1913.
Okay, so established by legislation, and how about in terms of legislation during that period? What have been the key pieces?
Well, there were key pieces directing us to collect information on wages, prices and living conditions, payroll employment. During successive years after our initial beginnings, there were economic downturns, and key members of Congress, the administration, other groups needed information, economic information, so we were directed to collect data. Then after World War II, there was shortages, manpower types of legislation that were passed where they wanted us to collect information on farm payroll statistics, employment and unemployment, and prices and living conditions has always been an important underlying assignment of the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay. In terms of how your agency is structured to fulfill its mission, what does the organization look like at the national level, and then sort of the region that you're responsible for, and I guess since most of our viewers are from the New England area, what does it look like at that level?
Okay. Well, our headquarters is in Washington, D.C., and we have 6 regional offices, of which we're one. We call ourselves the Boston, New York Regional Office because we had some consolidations back in the 90s. Totally across the country, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has about 2,400 employees. About 40% of those employees are out in the field offices, which include the regional offices. And then we also have primary sampling unit offices where we have small cadres employees that are out within the region, centrally based, so they can go out and collect data for things like our consumer price index.
Okay. So your Boston office is sort of the headquarters central for New England?
That's correct.
Okay.
For New England.
Let's see. So you've sort of touched on the broad categories of the kinds of data that your bureau collects. How many different products do you produce? What are your different lines of business?
Well, we have more than 24 major program areas that we focus on.
Okay.
That it would include the non-farm payroll statistics, employment and unemployment, prices, both consumer price indexes and the import PPI, what we call the producer price index, and the IPP, the industrial producer price index. Then we also cover occupational safety and health statistics, survey of occupational injuries and illnesses, census of fatal occupational injuries. We also collect information on employer costs, wages, and benefits, which is a quite varied area.
You use the term non-farm. Is all employment in the country categorized as either farm or non-farm?
Yes.
Okay, so that's, how far back does that term go?
Back to the days when things were largely agricultural.
In terms of the data, I mean, data collection, it's not an easy job.
No, it isn't. It's a challenge.
In terms of the data you collect, you're going out and you're trying to reach households and the citizenry and businesses. You're not a regulatory agency. You don't have any enforcement powers. So it's all voluntary?
That's correct. Participation in our surveys is voluntary. Our job as the Bureau of Labor Statistics is to collect, analyze, and disseminate significant economic information to key policy decision makers. But we don't make policy. It's not our job to make policy, and we are not regulatory. And in fact, the data that we collect for statistical purposes is collected under a pledge of confidentiality. It's protected by law under a law that we call the Confidential Information Protection and Statistical Efficiency Act. Under that law, for any BLS agent who willingly or knowingly discloses confidential information, that's a Class E felony, and there's a potential of 5 years imprisonment and or $250,000 fine. So we take confidentiality very seriously in our business. And yes, participation in our surveys is voluntary.
Okay. So in your 35 plus years with the Bureau, has anybody ever received that penalty?
Well,
to your knowledge?
The law was passed in 2002.
Okay.
And prior to that, we had a variety of commissioner's orders. So we were practicing that before the law was in place. No, we are very rigorous in our training of our employees. We get annual training, refresher training on the importance of maintaining confidentiality, breach training. All of those types of things are a regular part of our operating process.
It's really sort of a cornerstone of how you do your business. So Tim, the regional economist, that sounds like a lot of responsibility.
It is. Some days are more difficult than others, definitely, but I enjoy it.
How long have you been with the agency?
Since 1997. In February, I started my career with the Bureau in Washington and been the regional economist since 2009 in the Boston, New York regional office.
Okay. So how does the Boston office actually collect its data?
Well, part of the large reason why the regional office exists is to collect information across different economic subject areas, including inflation and prices, employment and unemployment, and compensation from area businesses and households. And so the samples are scientifically designed to represent different areas of the country, different industries, and the samples that we collect are mainly in the New England region.
So you're talking about samples, you're saying things like scientifically designed. Do you design them?
Not me personally, no.
Okay.
The samples are drawn from Washington, and the sample assignments are then provided to the regional offices through the different programs for collection.
Okay. So once all of this information comes in, what happens to it?
The information is processed through, for example, I used to work in a compensation program through a database collection instrument, and the information is forwarded into that database for calculation and to ultimately represent the populations from which the samples are designed to represent.
So in terms of the data collection, you've got folks that are out in the field, and I'm very glad we have Beth with us today because she's actually out there collecting the data. But how many different kinds of like surveys are you actually responsible for doing on a regular basis?
I don't have the exact numbers in hand. Deborah mentioned like 12 different product areas that we cover. I mean, it ranges from employment unemployment surveys to compensation surveys to price and living condition surveys. And so the Bureau is directly collecting from these samples from the price program for the CPI, which Beth works on. Okay. Other surveys are actually collected by other agencies, like the Census Bureau is actually collecting our data for the household survey, which ultimately produces the national unemployment rate.
Okay, all right.
And they're under contract to us.
So the Census Bureau is one of your major partners. Do you get data from any other government databases?
Well, we do get data from, we have cooperative agreements with state workforce agencies, okay, and we can collect data through the state unemployment insurance program under agreements, and so they're one of our major stakeholders. And in fact, those data that we collect from them actually go in to create our, what we call our sampling frame, where we're drawing the sample from.
Okay, okay. So Beth, let's turn to you. You are out there in the field doing
Correct.
These surveys.
Yes.
And how long have you been with the agency?
Almost 24 years.
Okay.
I started out as what they used to call a field manager, managing the part-time staff of data collectors. And once I started my family, I decided to step back a little bit and do the data collection myself.
Okay, so what does that look like? What does that mean for you? What is a typical day like?
Every month I download an assignment directly from Washington, and that assignment came from, as we were saying, the Census Bureau does the Consumer Expenditure Survey, where they interview people about where they spend their money, what they buy. They keep a diary of what they buy. And then they do a point of purchase survey where they're finding out where people are shopping. So they draw from those two databases, and they assign me outlets, and they assign me specific categories to go into a store and choose items out of that category, say breakfast cereal or chicken. It's a category that's assigned to me. I go in with my computer and my identification and an explanation of why I'm walking in their door, and try to explain the survey well enough to gain their cooperation to let me choose some items in their store to include in the index.
So when you're going out to these businesses, they don't know in advance that you're going to show up?
Some of the larger ones do, because we have a central office clearance system where some of them are cleared from our central office to their central office, so that they have a heads up. But any of the smaller stores, no, and I never go in assuming I'm going to get the information I need on the first visit. I'm there to introduce the survey, and if need be, I can make an appointment to come back, but I find it much better to introduce in person and be able to explain the survey. And
so when you're in the store and you're checking prices, you use cereal as an example, do you just sort of go to the cereal aisle, take out your laptop and start recording prices, or do you actually need to engage either with the store manager or with clerks? What's the personal connection?
in that case, well, every store is done with permission, as I said, so I always would check in and make sure a store manager knows I'm in the store. But generally, when I get to the specifics, I go with a department manager or someone who knows that area of the store the best. And we're trained by Washington in what's called a disaggregation process, where I consider all the items they have available in that store in the category that Washington wants me to look at. And I use a narrowing down process by asking the person I'm working with to give me an idea of their dollar volume sales. And then we narrow down to a specific item by eliminating categories.
So do you find that most of the businesses that you're doing your outreach to, if not on the first visit, the initial visit, as you say, to sort of introduce yourself in the survey, do you find that most of them are actually cooperative and will, allow you that follow-up to go in and get the information that you need?
Absolutely, they are. My goal is to be very well prepared when I go in so that I use their time very efficiently. So if there's a category, for example, carpeting, and of course I have carpeting in my house, I've bought carpeting, but I don't know everything about carpeting. So I'm going to use the reference guide that Washington provides me and read through that before I go in and look at their website if they have one, so that I'm well prepared to ask specific questions and not waste their time.
Okay. Is all of your time spent working with businesses, or do you sometimes work with regular citizens?
Yeah, the majority of my time is spent with businesses that I go to every month. So we were just talking about introducing the survey to a new business, but the majority of my work is going every month to the same businesses or every other month. And so I have a rapport and I have the same items every month. And the good part of my day is routine, where I just walk in, sign in a book, or say hello to the manager and go about my business. And if I have some questions before I leave, I'll speak to the appropriate person that could answer those questions, and then I'm on my way. So I don't really take very much of anyone's time on a regular basis. But the other part of our survey is the housing survey, where we interview landlords and managers and tenants at specifically assigned addresses, again, that are assigned from Washington. And we interview them just how many rooms, how many bathrooms, who pays for which utilities, what type of utilities, and what the rent is. And that's a big factor in the Consumer Price Index of what it costs people to live.
Okay. So the Consumer Price Index, quite honestly, when I think of your agency, I think you are the folks that report out periodically on what the Consumer Price Index is. We all sort of hear that term, but we don't really understand it. Tim, what is the Consumer Price Index?
Sure. The Consumer Price Index is an average measure of the change in a market basket of goods and services costs. And we're collecting this information for two population groups. The first is the All-Urban Consumers Population Group, which is abbreviated as the CPIU. And this represents about 88% of the U.S. population. And these include households that have your professionals, your technical workers, the unemployed, self-employed, retirees. Within that scope is also this Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. And these are the same households, except these households have to meet two strict criteria. The first is that more than 1/2 of the household's income must come from a wage or clerical type occupation. And the second is that at least one of the individuals in the household must be employed for 37 weeks or more, 12 for the 12 months prior to the collection period. And so we're collecting information on prices purchased by these population groups, including day-to-day living expenses, transportation fares, physician's charges, gasoline prices, food, clothing. And we're collecting this information from, as Beth said, 4,000 housing units per month, as well as 26,000 retail establishments per month. And the retail establishments will include your clothing department stores, grocery stores, gas filling stations, hospitals, and other department stores that have other goods and services that are tracked by the CPI.
So the numbers that you just referenced, 4,000 housing units per month, is that a national number? Is that the regional number?
That's a national number.
That's a national number. So any sense of what does that look like in terms of how many households would be contacted in New England?
I'd have to follow up with you on the exact number, but it would be,
Okay.
proportional
Some
to the
subset
population.
of
It's proportional to population.
Okay. And so Beth has mentioned a couple of times the list of who we go visit comes from Washington.
Yes.
And so tell me again how that list gets created.
The actual sampling list
Yeah.
is derived out of Washington based on population counts from the Census Bureau or universe counts of employment. For our employment surveys for the CPI collection, it's based on the point of purchase survey, which is we're asking households where they buy their goods and services.
Okay.
And then the housing is just a random sampling of addresses.
So Beth, I would be thinking, Tim, thank you for that. Beth, I can see where sort of going to a business, even a small business, you're introducing yourself. It's a place where they're used to people coming in. They probably see you coming through the door and they think, great, a new customer. And then you tell them who you are and you show them your credentials. And again, if they can't accommodate you right then and there, I can certainly see why they would want to be part of this, because you explain really how important it is. But in terms of the households, I would think that that would be a little bit more challenging. So you go knock on their door, what do you do?
It is a little more challenging, but I provide the information, I explain the survey, and the most important points that I make is the address that was chosen, not the person. So the Washington is interested in what the rent is for that address. So I don't need any personal information other than just to be able to recontact them. So that puts them at ease a little bit. And I'm very clear that it's voluntary and it's strictly confidential and used only for statistics. And the housing survey is very brief. It's very easy to get through all the questions in just a few minutes of their time.
So that was going to be my question. How long from beginning to end, from the time you show up at somebody's door, how long does it take to complete a housing survey?
An initial visit could take up to 10 minutes because I want to do a lot of explanation and make sure they're comfortable with it. And then once we get through, there is a longer set of questions for the initial visit. And then when I follow up 6 months later by telephone, it's just 2 or 3 minutes because they know why I'm calling. Sometimes I send a letter ahead of time if they're fairly new in the survey, so they're reminded as to why I'm calling them. And then there's just a shorter list of questions if it's the same occupant. It makes it quite brief and easy for them to participate.
So what will you present for credentials so that they know you are a legitimate person and not somebody there for, less than pure reasons?
I always have my badge with me, our Department of Labor badge. I will always be carrying this computer. And then I bring, depending on the survey, commodity services or housing survey, I'll bring information for them to read through.
And now, do you ask the questions and you record the data?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
and the
so
housing survey specifically, I have to read the questions as they're worded and answer them in order. And
Okay.
sometimes I have to explain that because they want to jump ahead or aren't really, the questions don't, because we do huge apartment buildings and we do single houses and we do duplexes and we do multi-units, and some of the questions are more geared towards a multi-story building that might have a gym and extra facilities when a house will not. So I have to walk through exactly as it's worded and explain anything along the way, but it's very basic information.
So if you're going out and you're doing your housing survey, are you likely to be, if you're on a particular street, are you likely to be doing multiple addresses on the same street or multiple homes in the same community?
The way the sampling usually comes in is it's a general area. There might be 2 or 3 on this street, 1 on the next corner, a couple on the next street. So it's in a town. I'm assigned by town, and that town might be a section of that town, but it's truly a random address sampling. So it could be number 43 and then number 79, and I have to go to those exact addresses that are assigned to me.
And it is done in a geographic cluster like that to save on travel expenses.
Right.
Of course, that makes sense, and it's much more efficient. I think that most citizens, they know a little bit about the Bureau of the Census, that as you said is one of your partners. You contract with them and they get you some data. They're familiar with the census, and they know that every so often the census workers are going to come, but maybe not so much with a representative of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So when you're going into a community, again, you've got your credentials, and people should really look at that. It's very, very important. We want people to be safe in their homes.
Right.
At the same time, this data really is important for the federal government to collect. So we need them. We need their help. But do you do any other communication with the community? Do you call City Hall? Do you call the police to tell them you're going to be around?
In the smaller towns, especially, I'll stop at the police department first and give them the description of my car and my license plate, and I'll give them the same information I'm going to give to the respondents and explain to them what general area of town that I'll be in case they get a call. They can assure the person that I've already checked in with them.
Okay, again, and it all is voluntary.
Right.
But you explain why it's important. So what's probably the biggest challenge you face when going to a home, a household?
Well, of course, giving the rent amount, which is the most important question in our survey, but some are, I just have to reassure them that it is the most important question, and it's purely statistical just to help us measure what it costs people to live.
And something that's important, I think, to underscore here, in the survey that Beth is addressing and the non-farm payroll statistics, when we survey companies to get that data, all of those data, those pieces of information are collected, and we combine them and we roll them up geographically or by industry, so in such a way that the specific identity of the respondent is protected. We're very conscientious about ensuring their privacy of their individual data.
So there's no connection to that.
It can't be traced back.
It can't be traced back to them, and that, I think, is a key factor. Now, Beth, on the housing part of the survey, if somebody agrees to participate, you will follow up with them, and they will have to again do the survey in another
in 6 months.
6 months.
Yes, and I let them know that. I will give you a phone call in 6 months, and as I said, when it's a follow-up call, it's an even shorter version of the survey. And it's very quick and easy, and I'd say I generally have about 85% success rate with the assignment that I get. So,
That seems like a very high percentage.
Yes.
Well, it's very
Okay.
high. I think I have been out before with one of our EAs who happened to be a gentleman. I think that the gentleman that worked for us might have a little tougher time in the household survey, just because of the fear factor. So again, we want the individuals when they come to the door to check for the credentials, to ask for the information, and all of our EAs, if they knock on a door, ring a doorbell, and there's no response, they will leave a packet of information, and we do ask that those individuals would call us at the regional office. The number will be there. You can talk to someone, and we will ensure that you get we put you in touch with the economic assistant who was knocking on your door.
or even if I leave it at the door and then go back another day or time that I think might be a better day or time, they've had a chance to read through the information and have a better idea of why I'm knocking on the door.
So you mentioned that you frequently do phone follow-up.
We try to do most of our housing by phone just for efficiency's sake.
Okay, all right, so nothing by email? Is there any of that kind of communication back
I generally
and forth
don't
with?
do email for housing.
We do have some other programs where we do what we call internet data collection.
Okay.
We have very stringent requirements for that. We do talk to our respondents in advance, and we set them up. Some of my field economists in the IPP PPI program will actually spend a significant amount of their initiation visit talking through not only what the survey's about and why they need their participation collecting the data, but also how they can provide updates through the internet format.
Okay. So Beth, you're out there, you're in the field, you're collecting all of this data. You go out and you interview 10 homeowners in a day, and you complete your surveys, and it's been a great day. Everybody's
Right.
answered your questions, and you hit send, and that information goes where?
Into
It
their
goes straight
internal
into
database.
Washington, and it's gone. I don't have a copy of it. I don't have
Okay.
anything. It's all
Okay.
transmitted in,
So
and
it's
I don't
all
see it again until
safeguarded.
it's, yep.
It's not, you know, there's not another 1, 2, or 3 people. It's not going back to the Boston office. You're not
Straight to
sitting
Washington.
around
Goes straight into the
desk
database.
talking. It just goes straight back into the database. And so how long does it take, Tim, I don't know, this might be for you, how long does it take to sort of process all of that information and get it to the point where it's published? What happens with it?
Well, in terms of the CPI, it's generally published 3 weeks after the reference month.
Okay.
And the month doesn't refer to any particular day of the month. It's an average of price change across all 30, 31 days, whatever the month has.
And what's the schedule for producing the CPI?
It's monthly.
It's monthly, and it's the same time
Right.
of the month?
If you went to our website, there's a release calendar in the upper right-hand corner of the website, and you could see when each CPI national release is scheduled for, as well as other economic data that we produce, employment, compensation.
Who uses the data?
Businesses, business executives, we tout that the information is used to make sound economic decisions. Households need this information to make useful decisions about their budget and their planning for expenses. For example, a business executive for a particular industry can use the information that we provide to compare industry trends against the national average across for the general economy, or they can compare their own individual firm's record against the industry average in terms of employment or price change or wages. We produce average wage statistics across occupations and areas that are useful for setting market wages for their companies. We also produce the Employment Cost Index, which is a measure of average change in employer compensation costs that can be used for escalation purposes, and these are free from shifts in underlying employment by occupation and industry, which may impact on the figures. And last, the CPI. This is used to adjust income for approximately 80 million persons. It's used to adjust Social Security entitlement for 47.6 million Social Security recipients. It's also used to adjust programs such as the income tax brackets. The CPI is used for that, as well as the retiree pay for our military and civil servants is using CPI. So a great many people in the United States are using that.
And it's certainly a tremendous impact on people's lives and the money that they're getting from government agencies and such to support them.
These data are, I think, probably as close to a free good as you can come in this day and age. We collect the data from respondents who participate voluntarily. We process it. We disseminate it on our website, and it's available to people who want it at no cost. We don't sell our products.
Well, and again, I think it's important to note. I mean, there's so many federal agencies out there, and yours is just you're very independent.
Yes, we are.
If you will, and a neutral source of information. You're not interpreting the data, you're not making judgments about the data.
That's true.
You are reaching the business community, you're reaching the citizens, the homeowners, or the renters, and you're really just reporting out the facts.
That's exactly correct. Our mission is to observe, collect, analyze, and disseminate. We don't make judgments about the data. Sometimes in my personal life, when someone finds out I work for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the first question I get is, so how is the economy doing? And we stay away from those questions. It's not our job to interpret how the economy is doing. There are plenty of other entities that like to make judgments.
Right.
But our job is to just get the facts out there so that people know that these data that they're seeing are collected in as objective a manner as we can possibly do it. And I would also like to add that we're very careful about explaining our concepts, our definitions, our methodologies. They're well documented. You can find those on our website. You can talk to people like Tim. You could even ask Beth, if she's at your door and you have a question about something like that. It's important that the general public understand how we collect the data and that they understand what we're doing. It's been reviewed, it's been tested rigorously. We do, over time, you will see us make changes to our methodology, either based on better technology that enables us to capture more data and process it more efficiently, or there's advances in statistical techniques, or advances in cognitive behavior concepts that help us to refine our surveys so that we're asking the questions in a more objective manner. So we do update our surveys and our methodologies over time, but we always make sure that we document those. And frequently in some of our press releases, you will see even if we change the seasonal adjustment factors on the non-farm payroll statistics, we'll put a box in the release to explain what was done.
So sort of very much a focus on the transparency.
That's exactly correct. Yes.
Part of things. So again, Deborah, you've been there a while. You've all been at your agency a fair amount of time, and as you said, things change and the agency changes, always with a focus on that neutrality and the integrity of the data. But I'm thinking yours is probably an agency where the advances in technology has really changed how you do your work. Tim, when you came on board with the agency, You know, I mean, how much different is it today with the advancements in technology?
Well, when I first came aboard, the internet was just starting to get started, and you know, we tout that the Bureau of Labor Statistics federal website is one of the top 10 most popular federal websites in the country.
Wow.
So there's a lot of users accessing the information. That's how we disseminate the information. One of our main vehicles is the website, and the website has undergone changes during my career to make it more user-friendly, to improve the search engine capabilities, to make it easier for navigational purposes, so people can get access to the information that they're ultimately interested in. Because there's a wealth of information on the website.
So you mentioned, you know, the various constituency groups that use the data, and I'm guessing if you were going to identify one of them as sort of the primary constituency group who's using this data, who would it be?
American Congress, I think, is one of the primary users of the information. The Federal Reserve Board publishes coincident economic indicators using many of our statistics, unemployment, prices, and researchers that are heavily data dependent use our information quite widely.
A lot of academics. Another one of our products we have is Occupational Outlook Handbook. So many young people who are trying to decide what career they may want to embark upon. That's a resource for them, and it's very popular with career counselors in schools. And we also have occupational wage information that you can pair with that, so you can get an idea. And that's even calibrated to localities, so you can get an idea. You know, if you work in a particular area and you're interested in a particular occupation, you can get an idea of what the wage rates are in that area.
So I'm thinking sort of back to my research methods class in college. You know, you talk about sampling, and you're getting information from human beings, and you know you're reporting it, and obviously you go to great lengths to make sure that it's reliable, and you have to have so many respondents, I would think, to sort of ensure that it was reliable. When you speak about really how accurate you believe your data is, I mean, is it 99.9% accurate? Is it 90% accurate? How do you talk about you know, your level of confidence in the data that you're disseminating? Because the reality is that when this data hits the streets, people start drawing all kinds of conclusions from it. You know,
and that's why we don't draw conclusions.
Exactly. And you know, you might see the stock market go up, you might see the stock market go down. So with what level of confidence do you disseminate these numbers to the Congress, to the American public?
Sure. The Bureau of Labor Statistics acknowledges that there's going to be what's called sample error with the sample statistics that we provide, because we cannot, based on resources, collect information from all the population or from all the companies in the country. And so, generally speaking, most surveys are constructed at the 90% confidence level, which means that any sample statistic that is published differs by no more than 1.6 standard errors from the true population value. And so to give you an example, that's kind of statistical jargon, the monthly count in the non-farm payroll employment is on the level of plus or minus 90,000.
Okay.
So in the sample-based statistic, if the employment level were to have changed by 50,000, based on the confidence interval, that could have indicated a decline of 40,000 or an increase of 140,000. So there's some...
It's important to remember that what we're trying to measure is a moving target. We're measuring facts relative to the population of the United States or the labor force of the United States, and that's very fluid. And because we have to use samples, there's going to be sampling errors. Sometimes we also have non-sampling error, and we work very hard to eliminate non-sampling error. But we're always going to try to publish a confidence interval along with the data so that whoever's using it can have an idea of just where the strengths are in the data and where the weaknesses are. And that's a big part of the job that people like Tim are doing in our economic analysis and information units, is they're helping the public to understand, here's the data, here's how we got it, and here's the strengths and weaknesses of the data.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
At the end of the year, we're able to obtain benchmark counts from our quarterly census of employment and wages, which is based on the state unemployment insurance records. And based on the March 2013 benchmark count for non-farm payroll employment, the adjustment for March 2013 was 347,000 of about 150 million employees. So the adjustment was about 0.3%.
You lost me.
Oh. So,
but what I did understand is you said that there's a 90% confidence level
right.
in the data, and I think that that's something that most people can understand. So when you're, sort of again, you all are collecting the data for the New England states. So it's being collected, it's being analyzed, it's being published. What really is the impact on the economic impact here in New England?
Well, I think people can rely on the Bureau of Labor Statistics for providing credible information on possible shifts in the regional economy based on the sample surveys that we are collecting data from and what we're publishing, because it has to meet strict statistical criteria for us in order for us to publish it.
Okay.
And I've had specific training on how to collect the data, and that is pretty much every month we have a meeting and we talk about, make sure we're collecting the data accurately and keeping everybody up to date on the current requirements. But when I go into a store, there's very specific things. I have a very specific list of details to identify that item. And for example, produce, I have to weigh that item if it's not sold per pound. I let Washington know how much it weighs. If it's a big difference from last time, I need to ask the respondent, do you know any driving force behind why the lettuce heads are so small right now, or why they're so much bigger right now, or why the price went up so much? So I need to provide as much detail to Washington as I can. And other food items, I might find it looks exactly the same, but instead of 8 ounces, now it's 6 ounces. Well, that's a big quality difference, so I need to make sure that I'm reporting that to Washington so they know exactly what's happening with that product and whether it's the same item or it has changed in some way, and then they adjust for the quality changes.
In terms of what you do, is there any other entity out there that is doing anything along the lines of the Bureau of Labor Statistics?
Sure. There's private sector organizations called like the Million Prices Project. I believe it's using internet pricing. They're trawling the web for prices and they're calculating an average price change from that. I think it's important to note that they kind of use the CPI as a basis on how accurate these measures are. There's also private sector payroll counts. I think it's called ADP, I believe it is, that has private sector employment levels, and that's usually put out shortly before the national numbers to kind of give a sense of where the national numbers are going to be.
I think the important thing to remember about that one is there are some of these private sector companies that are trying to produce, for example, an employment count of jobs. But all of them come back to benchmarking themselves to what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is providing. We are an organization who we're independent. We strive very hard to ensure that the data that we provide are accurate, objective, relevant, timely, and accessible, and that we're not being steered by political forces. We're going out into the business community and we're observing, we're collecting the data, and we're analyzing and disseminating it without regard to an agenda.
And that is a very, very important distinction, sort of the nonpartisan nature of what you do, because again, this information really, it does impact people's lives.
It affects so many areas of people's lives, and I think it's critical for the American taxpayer to understand that they do have an objective entity that's measuring these economic forces and reporting it back to them.
So does everybody who works for your agency, are they all economists or statisticians or?
Well, most of us in the regional offices were either economists or statisticians. When you get to Washington, D.C. in our headquarters, we have a few additional staff who work largely in research. We have mathematical statisticians. We have cognitive behavior experts who help us design surveys so that they're completely objective and we don't introduce I was talking a little bit earlier about non-sampling, or we don't introduce bias in the way we ask questions. So you'll find a little more variety in Washington.
So when you came to work for the agency, what was your first job?
My first job, this is an interesting question. I actually began as a cooperative education student, and I worked in the Economic Analysis and Information Unit. And then I went to the Division of Federal State Cooperative Programs, where we worked with state workforce agencies. So that was my first job.
What part of the country did you start in?
I actually started in Dallas, Texas.
Okay. And what university?
Texas Woman's University.
Okay. All right, excellent. Tim, how about you?
I started in the Washington National Office with the Division of Labor Force Statistics, which is the program that analyzes the current population survey data, which is the Census Bureau administered survey that ultimately is used to publish the national unemployment rate. And so I started in that program, analysis and answering some customer inquiries, and then traveled out to New England to follow my wife, and here I am. And was in a field collection role at first with the National Compensation Survey, which is the instrument that produces the Employment Cost Index, and then was able to transfer into the EA&I office in 2002. So I've been with the dissemination office for, 12 years.
Wow, wow. And Beth, you told us a little bit about your history. So how many employees, again, are sort of in the New England area?
We have about 125 spread across. We have the Boston office. We have another large data collection office in New York. There's an EA&I branch in New York also, because that's a major market area, and we need people there. We also have dispersed throughout the New England region what we call primary sampling unit offices. So like we have one in Hartford, Danbury, Springfield, and they'll have a small cadre of people just like Beth who are collecting the data for primarily for the Consumer Price Index.
So what's an entry-level position?
What's known as a GS7 economist. Yeah,
And,
generally.
so it is an economist.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, it's a little different for our part-time economic assistants. We do look for people with economics backgrounds. For our full-time economists, you must have at least 21 hours of economics and or statistics in combination to apply for one of our economist jobs.
Okay. You've mentioned sort of throughout our conversation some of the federal partners. You mentioned the Bureau of the Census, you mentioned the Federal Reserve Bank, you mentioned your relationship with the states. Are there any other major partnerships that you have that allow you to do your work?
Well, there's the there's the general public. We have a major partnership with them. They provide us funding through their tax dollars, and we are contacting them to collect the data and then compile that and provide it back to them as, I use the term free good, but I mean they don't have to pay us to get that data.
Right.
Sometimes you'll see data packages from data analysis firms, and they sell nice packages, and a lot of the data that you may find in there will be coming from the Bureau of Labor.
There you go. Comes from the work that you've all done. So you've mentioned, the American public, and that's why we do this show, is to sort of provide basic information on various parts of the federal government, the different agencies, who they are, what their mission is, and why that's important. So we've covered an awful lot of ground. Most of it I understood. What haven't we, because our viewership is the general public, what haven't we talked about? What didn't I know enough to ask about that you think our viewers need to know? Well,
I think our viewers need to understand that they can go to our website or they can call into our office, and we will help them. Either if they already know what they're looking for, they can get it from us if we have it. If they can't find what they need, they can talk to someone like Tim or Tim's staff. They will help them. Sometimes people call in and they don't really know what they want, but we'll try to help them figure out if we've got something that can answer their questions.
And I took a look at your website, again, very, very informative. I love that a young person who is interested in choosing a career and not sure what they might want to do can sort of look at the data that you've put out there. It's not a great thing to go to college and then not have a job.
That's true.
So
Knowledge
it's
is
nice,
information.
It's nice
Knowledge
to
is
do a
power.
little bit of homework. And Tim gave me this great Bureau of Labor Statistics information guide. Now, is all the data in here also replicated and available online? Is this something that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That has most of the program contact information and describes what the data the programs are producing. So you can get that from the website. Most of the information you can get from the website, which is www.bls.gov.
Okay. All right. Beth, any last thoughts?
No, well, the only other thing I wanted to talk about was the sample, the commodities and services sample that we do is always changing to keep up with buying trends and changes in products that are available. So I don't just go to the same items for months and months and months. We're constantly adding in new places and new items to keep up with things, say 4 years ago when organic became high demand and now gluten-free is high demand. So we want to always make sure that our sample is current as to what buying trends are happening and keeping up with the technology. Televisions and any kind of electronics are changing every 6 months. So we make sure our sample is fresh with the most current buying habits that are out there.
Good point. Tim, how about you?
Again, we just appreciate the cooperation across businesses and households for our voluntary surveys. Without this information provided by survey participants, we would not be able to publish the important information that is of great interest to the public and businesses to make sound economic decisions.
Deborah?
I do want to say to those respondents, individuals and businesses who said yes when we asked them to provide us with their information, thank you. We appreciate that. You make our day, and we love when you say yes. For other individuals, maybe in your future somewhere we'll be knocking on your door or we'll be coming into your business and asking you to participate in one of our surveys, and I would ask you to say yes, consider participation.
There you go. I think that's a great note to end on. So I want to thank Regional Commissioner Deborah Brown, Regional Economist Tim Considine, and Economic Assistant Beth Murphy for being with us today and for helping us to better understand the work of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and their role as an independent national statistical agency that collects, processes, analyzes, and disseminates essential statistical data to the American public, the United States Congress, other federal agencies, state and local governments, businesses, and labor. I thank you for watching, and I hope that you will continue to join us as we feature other federal agencies on your federal government.